A very good evening. This is our...
Recording in progress.
A very good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Bengal Club Library Subcommittee, and the chairperson of the Library Subcommittee, Mr. Partho Ranjan Das, who has graced us with his presence today, I would like to say that it is a privilege and an honor to have all of you from across puddles and ponds come and join us this evening. As you know, this is our 37th. Anasuya, is that right? Yeah. This is our 37th meeting of the book club, which we started during the COVID year, 2021, and most of you have been with us. On the hybrid, let me first introduce Dr. Otish Mitro, who is from Montana, University of Montana. He's always there with us. Mr. Vinod Pillai, also a great enthusiast. Mr. Vivek Krishna, who is with us and will probably show himself in a few seconds. And Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik from Bombay. Our team at the Bengal Club Book Club is being represented tonight by Dr. Choitali Moitro on my right and Mrs. Anasuya Paul on my left. And we have a very interesting and a kind of unique book that we are looking at tonight. The book is written by a 30-something youngster, a doubly diasporic woman who came from Kenya to London. But obviously, the biological quotient is Indian. What is even more rare is that the book is not a complex book. The book deals with grief and how a child who is 11 years old deals with the seismic loss of a mother. Gopi is 11 years old, and she and her two sisters are trying to deal with a situation where their father, who is an electrician and runs an electrical company, is so overcome with the responsibilities that he has that he wants to initiate all the girls to something meaningful that will teach them values in life. In order to do that, he looks at the game of squash. And in this gripping tale, the author has mirrored their grief of these three girls and the father in the game of squash. So the game of squash in Western Lane squash courts becomes a trope. One, to deal with this loss of their mother, and two, as a space where language is not only about communicating with words, but the spaces between what we can express in times of such severe separation and dysfunctionality. Dr. Choitali Moitro will lead the discussion today. Anasuya and I will chip in where we can. And it doesn't matter whether you've read the book or not. Usually I manage to send you some sort of a PDF, but I apologize because the book is so new and is within the Booker Prize shortlist, it is not available on PDF. So it is only available on Amazon. So if you at some stage feel you need to buy it, go ahead and buy it. It's a different kind of book. And the Booker Committee has surprised us in a way because many academics and reviewers all over the world are saying, what's in the book? What's so great about the book? Is it giving us a lesson of life? Is it teaching us something phenomenal that we don't know? You know, the truth is, it's very subjective. But I think all three of us have felt that it is unique in the way that it is stylistically, through its language of brevity, reflecting the game of squash, and it is also reflecting the way in which language is spoken and unspoken. So I will leave it at that and see what Choitali has to say, and we'll continue the conversation and then open it up for our audience and for you, dear hybrid contenders. Okay? So Choitali, go ahead.
Good evening once again, and welcome to this evening's book club meet. As Julie Di has just now said, this is the 37th meet, which means it's 3 years plus. Spearheaded by Julie Di's efforts and leadership, which she did not say, but that was always there, and we have been able to discuss, read, agree, disagree on so many aspects of so many books. So today we all are here, and particularly happy to see you all on the screen. Vivek, a big welcome to you. Paramita, same to you. So as Julie Di has explained, this evening's book is a Booker-nominated book by Chetna Maroo, which is called The Western Lane. Now, she has told you quite a bit about the book. I would just add certain other details which might sort of dovetail into what she has been saying so far. Chetna Maroo was born in Kenya. And as we say that, Julie Di just now said she's double diasporic. We should assume that she must be among the Gujarati Indians whose legal status slowly improved, which made them more and more self-reliant and also cautious. So we don't know a lot of this young author, but we can safely say that acculturation, whatever way it sort of comes to the pen of a flourishing author, has not severed the family ties and the rootedness that you find in this novel. And generally, we all know that in 2017, the Kenyan Asians were recognized as the 44th tribe for their contributions to the commercial and cultural fields. So that's not a lot about Chetna Maroo per se, but we can safely look at I would like to talk about two other works that she has done. One is a novel called Brothers and Sisters, which is again, it's a sort of study in relationships, as Western Lane is. And I came across a mathematically precise micropiece, which was published in 2017 in Cincinnati Review. And this micropiece has a very, very unusual name. It is called A Hard Jar of Gunpowder. Let me repeat it. A Hard Jar of Gunpowder. So I have said it's precise, and I don't think it was more than 500 words. But within that, Maroo has brought in Babel and Johannes Kepler. And she has used the epistolary mode, which all of you can read when you have a minute. And she tries to establish, with a very thrustful motive, the force which sort of prods a human being along. I don't want to use the word destiny straight away, but what I'm trying to say is that there is something within the biology, the psychology of a human being, which makes him or her get along in a difficult situation. That is suggested. And in this micropiece, very cleverly, the speaker is not named, only the willpower of this speaker is shown by little bits of letters written to the father. So the same thing is happening to Gopi, the central character of Western Lane. And as Julie has told you, Western Lane is, I felt, Anushwa will, of course, sort of very soon give her opinion. I felt that it's a novel about dealing with grief for young people. You see, grief will have a different language for different ages. All of us know that from experience. Here, the father of Gopi is bereft after the untimely demise of his wife. And the three girls who are absolutely staring at destiny once their mother dies, they try to become, they sort of cocoon themselves, I should say, and take care of each other. And the father, somehow, there is a famous, quite a sort of outstanding passage where the girls are downstairs and the father is looking from the balcony trying to instruct them on the game of squash. So the squash, not initially, but very, very gradually, surely and certainly becomes a coping mechanism for this grief. And as the squash court is described as the training given to Gopi, or rather, shall I say, thrust on Gopi, is quite rigorous, a bit too rigorous, it also emerges that this influences the father, it influences the other two sisters, it influences every other character in the novel. The novel, as you just heard, is not about too many characters. It's not about a very dissipated situation either. It's a focused, closed circuit situation where Maroo is trying to focus on the importance of the unit of family in the Indian context. She's writing from London. She's a diasporic. All her diasporic perspectives are there. But she's making it a point to give the family, or make the family come out in capital letters, whatever that means, isn't it? So that is initially what I wanted to share with you all. And I also wanted to share that if you have read the interview with Chetna Maroo, she says, she has been asked whether this is a sports novel, and she says yes, but she also says it's a family novel, it's a sort of tragic novel, and so many other things. So when she was saying it was sports novel, I'm sure many of us would remember many books. For me, I remembered Fat City by Leonard Gardner, and the other one, The Natural, by my favorite author Malamud. So these two books came to my mind, but I'm sure many books can come to your minds, whether it's a sports novel, but we can't dismiss the novel by just saying that it's a sports novel. It's much more than that. And whatever is unsaid in the novel carries more force than whatever is said. So it has a very strong subtext, a very strong linguistic sort of innuendos, also certain linguistic suggestions, how language also sort of becomes a friend and sometimes just a sort of barrier to go to other people. Incidentally, this novel centers in the 1980s of London, and I myself lived in England at that time, and I don't deny that I did face certain cultural struggles, as I'm sure the family who had been staying there did the same. But we can talk in details about this. One final word about the Booker nomination. The Booker nomination includes, the judges include names like James Shapiro and S.E. Goandan. And S.E. Goandan, I remember from her novel Washington Black, which is particularly touching. I think what she says about the novel and the other 11 novels, 12 novels are sort of chosen, and among those 12, I think 6 would be given or I'm not sure how many.
Shortlisted.
Shortlisted. So the most important running theme is how an individual is coping with existence, which is the theme of the now, N-O-W, now. And with that, of course, the idea, the insight of Abraham Maslow comes in, the necessity of love, the necessity to feel belonged, and so many other theories can be sort of talked about, where the acceptance factor becomes important for every existential crisis that we all are constantly befalling in the modern times. So Anushwa will please now take up the narrative and give her valuable opinion on the book.
I just wanted to recognize before Anasuya comes on, may I recognize Christine Marsh. Chris Marsh, thank you. It's probably just after lunch, so we'll keep you hungry for a bit, but would love for your views, always welcome to hear them. And once again, I'd like to welcome Vivek Krishna, very much a part of our Bengal Club, book club, stalwart, like Atish and Paramita and Vinod. So, Anna, have your say, take your time. And the strategy is, of course, today,
3 minutes.
For about 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes, and then I have a few things to talk about on the diaspora. So that'll make one round robin, and then we'll open it up for all of you on hybrid, and then we will try and inveigle and tempt our audience to have their say. Anasuya Pal is an active member, voracious reader. She's a counselor, and she has 2 young girls who are very successful too. So let's see what the mother and the reader have to bring to the table. Go ahead.
Thank you, Julie. Very generous introduction, I must say. So let me get down to the chase. This is a debut novel by Chetna Maroo, as Choitali pointed out. And I'd like to first handle the very title of the book. She's titled it The Western Lane. As people who have read it, it is the name of the sports club where they used to go to pursue the game of squash. But I think the very title has its own nuances for an Eastern, twice immigrant child living in a Western world. And as we explore in the book, we realize that she is choosing to lead a very Western life, or choosing to make choices which are very Western as opposed to an Asian. So that makes me think whether Chetna Maroo had thought of that when she had titled this book The Western Lane. And the other very striking thing that that spoke to me was the style in which she had worded the story. So, to be honest, when I started reading it, I was a little surprised that a style which sounds kind of juvenile and raw and pretty unfinished should have made it to the Booker long list. But then as you progress and you notice that it is written in first person, and the narrator is the 11-year-old youngest daughter, Gopi, and you realize that it's an 11-year-old's perspective of life, how it unfolds in front of her, and how she sees things. So she kind of telescopes into all the events and gives her take on all the situations which are very adult around her. And the cruelty of fate that she should lose her mother, and this speaks a lot throughout the book, where you understand how the 3 girls, 15, 13 and 11, Mona, Kush and Gopi, have to process something as humongous as losing their mother. Like Asian families, it's a very tight-knit family. And Chetna Maroo's writing is very nuanced, and you are made to feel that they had a very happy, well-knit family bonding till the mother died. And it starts at that base, but things start to unravel quite differently for them when they're provoked by relatives variously about what is going to be the future of the father as well as the daughters. And therefore, as Julie mentioned, that the game of squash starts to play center stage in the story. There is a lot that is said about the game of squash, including how one harnesses one's inner violence and unleashes it with control on the court. And we learn variously how the game and the ghosting and the echo and the returns play a very big part in teaching a person how to cope with life. And there comes an inflection point in the story. And it's quite a defining moment in the story when Gopi, quite unconsciously yet deliberately, very grievously injures her father in a training session. So that's when many things start to kind of go out of control. And the author very simply states the day-to-day affairs of the home, and through that you see how three little girls are beginning to cope with their mother's death, and also the father's disinterest in kind of materially supporting the family, because as mentioned, he was an electrician, but he was doing no work. So the eldest starts to work, and the second one processes her grief by having imaginary conversations in Gujarati with her mother in the middle of the night. And Gopi thinks that she is kind of unburdening her father by accepting to go and stay with the uncle in Scotland. So how people interpret adults, a child's interpretation of a father's signals, and whether she is right or whether she is wrong, much is left to the imagination. But that kind of comprises much of it. I would also like to make note of the fact that the language Gujarati is kind of tells you that a person's mother tongue often is the bridge to moments of intimacy with loved ones. And when you are nostalgic or you're missing someone from a faraway land, that language becomes a bridge. And we note that in the way Kush talks to her mother in the imaginary conversations in Gujarati. So on the whole, I was left a little undecided when I came to the end. It was a very hard-hitting story. Yes, a lot of grief. And I think the child's perspective is very well brought out. Though the language was abrupt and kind of jerky at times, I thought that was perhaps the way a child would be thinking, and she did a good job in using that style. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's given us a segue. Vivek, before I come to you, I just very quickly want to go and expand on a theme which is often neglected. In diasporic authors, the issue of language, especially if you are a third or a fourth generation diasporic person, imagine when there is any talk about the mother, the author Maroo turns to the comfort of Gujarati. And the other two sisters, for some reason, could not really communicate with the mother who spoke very little English. So losing her mother tongue and losing her motherland becomes a continuous trope for little Gopi, who's 11 years old. More than that, if you theorize it, for those of us who are interested in connecting the dots, you will see that in most diasporic Asian societies, and I'm not just talking Indian diaspora, I'm talking about the Chinese diaspora, the Japanese diaspora, all over the world, the Korean diaspora. My English classes at the University of Toronto, I learned so much about how parents purposely wanted to underplay the biological language or literature or the arts. So kids who were from Bengal in Toronto and in my class, for example, it's a one-on-one experience, and I was so surprised. They were encouraged to learn ballet, they were encouraged to learn French, they were encouraged to acculturate into the white Canadian, Anglo-Canadian society. Whereas their mother tongue, Bharatanatyam, Sanskrit, Tagore, Rabindra Sangeet by Bengali families was not at all encouraged. So for whatever reason, there is a reflection of that. And the comfort level comes when she is described, this little girl says, when she looks back, that when there were times when her mother could not communicate with the rest of the British friends, the girls actively, physically got into her space, smelt her smell, touched her body to feel at home. So from there, Vivek, if you pick it up, that'll be wonderful. Then Paramita, Vinod, and Atish. Go ahead, Vivek. Vivek, are you muted, dear?
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
Right. Right. I have to tell you that I was entranced by this very short and concise, only 161-page long Western Lane. It is nonetheless a complete tour de force of a story. It is so well written, speaking in multiple voices, using simple short sentences to maximum effect to tell a deceptively simple story. It says, we're saying that first is a debut novel for Chetna Maroo, but the blurb on the hard copy of the book says he was also the recipient of the Paris Review's 2022 film.
Vivek ji, you're muted again. You're muted again.
Unmute kore din, please, Mr. Vivek Krishna ke.
Now am I back?
You're back.
I don't know why it's going off suddenly. I didn't do anything. It went off while I was talking.
Go ahead. We missed a bit of yours, so we can go back to that 137-page novel.
Okay, short and concise, only I saw 161 pages in the print copy that I've got. Western Lane is nonetheless a complete tour de force of a story. So well written, speaking in multiple voices, use short sentences to maximum effect to tell a deceptively simple story. There are many characters who make up the family. The deeply grieving Gujarati father who is of East African origin, his family having emigrated to the UK presumably after the troubles in East Africa, mourning the untimely loss of his beloved non-Gujarati wife. Maybe I've got that wrong from what I've heard from everybody else so far. His three daughters, Mona, Kush and Gopi, are the three pre-adolescent daughters ranging in age from 15, 13 to 11 at the time the mother died, and who are each severely traumatized by the fact that their mother is no longer there for them. A caring uncle, Pavan, their father's younger brother, and his traditional wife, Ranjan, who are childless, add to and make up the basic framework of the shattered, grieving family. At the start of this polished and disciplined book, Gopi stands on a squash court outside London. She isn't playing. Instead, she's listening to the sound of the ball hitting the wall on an adjacent quick, low, pistol shot of a sound with a close echo. The squash court is Western Lane, and it forms the backbone of the tale, as a web is woven, artlessly almost, and the story unravels for the spellbound reader. and is as real a character as any of the human beings in this story. The father takes it upon himself to build up the character of his daughters by training them compulsively in the squash courts of Western Lane to the point of exhaustion. I myself recall coming to Calcutta in 1970 straight out of college, and the first club I joined on arrival was the Calcutta Rackets Club, which was an amazing introduction to the city. And the hours I spent there learning to play squash and the friends I made have lasted for half a century. We were mainly men playing in the early days, although a few women were occasionally found playing the game also. The descriptions of the game are spot on, and the research done on the great players in the 60s and 70s, whose own training and experience play a big part in the development and skills of the youngest Gopi, is the father uses Gopi's training to avoid his grief and anxiety about raising 3 girls on his own. And after their increasingly strenuous training sessions, he and Gopi spend hours watching videos of the legendary athlete Jahangir Khan and his rivals Jeff Hunt and Hiri Jahan. Soon he is neglecting his job as an electrician and turns a blind eye to his family's financial troubles, not to mention their emotional ones. The play of conversation and train of thought comes through as being totally authentic. The attraction of Maroo's prose lies in what is left unsaid. On the practice court, the players can control what is out of control elsewhere. Outcomes, inhibition. But when in competition, Gopi knows you are alone. That's how it's supposed to be. You are supposed to find your own way out. No one can help you. No one can concentrate for you or fear losing on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vivek. On point and crisp as usual. Would Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik please come aboard and tell us what you thought?
The best part of this story is when the father gives her the lesson of squash to, get to overcome the grief. And if you see, she's a pre-puberty child, and I have a single daughter as well. Now she's an adult. But, I and even my mother, when I was an adolescent, because in the adolescent period, children need to play, children need to do a lot of different things, so that their hormonal levels are such that, they don't take in or get into a bad situation or whatever, learn bad things. So I think it was a wonderful thing about this story where the father thinks about the game of squash to distract her from that grief and to bring her concentration and, bring a pathway to her life, a new type of pathway to her life, give her a specific direction to her life. So I just loved that part of the story.
Paramita, how would you configure the idea? I found, I think, not just me, but I think Anasuya and Choitali and those of us who've read the book, the exhaustion, 2 to 4 hours of squash per day. I think at times Gopi said that she was going to collapse, but the father was relentless. So, it did have a good objective in mind to keep her completely concentrated on the game and to teach her that to get something you have to give a lot. And the pressure on her to perform, it was not just a game, but to win that prize. So how would you see this competitive part? Do you think it's a very South Asian things amongst immigrants to excel? If you remember Rishi Sunak's words, what his parents told him, and he also has a very similar ethos.
Maybe that played on the father's mind, and if you remember, the father also used to play squash. So maybe a dream of excelling in squash was always there, and he put that on his daughter. So sometimes we put our dreams into our children. So it was something like that on the father as well. And he was like, this force or this competitiveness was not needed. But I felt that because of him playing squash, he wanted that, like what he couldn't do, he wanted his child to do that. So, yes, Julie.
Thank you. Choitali,
Yes, I think, yes, it's a good conversation. I think all of us agree, and she did grow apart. Due to that rigorous training, she and her other two sisters did not have the same gallop of growth. That also sort of counts for the end of the novel, where, if you remember, what I liked was the last little sentence, I stood up. So that had to build up, and this rigorous training did contribute to that I felt.
So let's see what Mr. Vinod Pillai, what would you have to say about the novel?
Good evening, everyone. Actually, I just managed to get the book yesterday and I just read 1 or 2 pages. I haven't really read the book because I was busy in a training program right up to 6 this evening. So I haven't read it, but listening to what you're saying, I'm just trying to, I feel it did a good thing in buying the book for sure. And I would read it. At this stage, I think it would be very wrong on my part to even say anything about it, except for the language that struck me. The 1 or 2 pages that I read, I found the language so very different. There are no, it's written in such a simple way, and yet there is so much in between. So I felt she is a powerful writer, but it's too early for me to really say anything about the book. So I think.
I think, Vinod, you make a lot of sense because, we always presume, an accountant, 30 plus, what can she do? But she is number 6 on the short list of 6. Thanks so much. Chris, are you there? Chris Marsh? All the way from London? Not yet. She was here a little while ago, yeah. Huh?
I am here.
Yeah, Chris, would you...
Hello, I am here.
Yes, Chris, would you tell us what you think?
Well, I can't really participate in this discussion because I haven't read the book. I just came along to listen to what other people had to say. It's always fascinating to listen to your views. I'm particularly interested in the diaspora thing and this business about language. I'm not a sports person at all, so if I'd thought about reading the book and I picked it up in a bookshop or something, I would put it down again. It's not my thing, but it's lovely to see you all, and I love hearing your voices and your careful examination of the subject. So thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Chris. Thank you. Dr. Atish Mitro? Atish, your views. Yeah. I know you haven't probably got the book yet, but from what
that's why I'll be a listener today, like other two that say.
Okay, that's fine. So may I call on Mrs. Sangeeta Kishlu to please say a few words, who's read the book avidly and is always wonderful with her insights. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was very prompt to get the book because I thought I may not be able to get a copy of it. And I was on vacation, so it was really an opportunity to read the book leisurely. And yes, the first thing that struck me was the simplicity of the language. And when I went through the book and came to the end, I thought sometimes like I felt a little cheated, like it was short on something. But then after thinking, I thought a lot about this book. It was written through the lens of an 11-year-old. And therefore, like Anushka said, by using that style, she was able to really connect us with a 11-year-old child's point of view of life. I think I want to read that first page, which actually takes you into the book right away, which is the echo, which is the ball striking the wall of the court, is louder than the shot itself. I was just sort of reflecting on this very profound sentence, and it's like the echo is what life, the way life panned out, and the shot is her mother's death. So her mother passed away. It went in a flash. But it pans out into so many other things. And I think the central thing that I found in the book is how the mother's death actually made them metamorphose from a traditional Gujarati conservative family. They crossed the line and went into a more Western way of life. And under a lot of pressure from Auntie Ranjan and the Gujarati community. And the father, in his quite uncommunicative he was not emotionally communicative, but communicative by action with his daughters, is how he allowed Gopi to get into this relationship with Jed. Not because of a relationship per se, but because it opened up different parts of her mind. And it opened up for him also with his relationship with Ged's mother. Because in the book it says that he had conversations with her, or it seemed he had conversations with her which he never had with his wife. So his mind was also opening up to a different, different way of life, and he wanted that for his children. The other, of course, I think the central part of the book is that page, which I think Vivek referred to, is that page 49, where I think that's the central part of the book, where when you are on the court in the middle of a game, in a way you are alone. That is how it is supposed to be. You are supposed to find your own way out. You have to find the shots and make the space you need. And I think the father kind of ingrained that mindset into her by giving, or not giving, but rather forcing almost the opportunity and the seriousness of a game of golf for her as well as for her sisters. Her sisters didn't take to that with the resilience and rigor that Gopi did. And Mona went more into housekeeping and becoming like the mother of the home. But Gopi went the direction her father had hoped for all the girls, actually. And like the others have said, what is interesting is the many things, there are a lot of things coming out of inference rather than what is written. And for example, the radiator didn't work in their house, and he was an electrician. So it obviously meant that he wasn't a great electrician, and they didn't know whether he was really going to work. So he was very irresponsible in a way about his financial commitments to the family, and Mona really took charge of the situation with housekeeping as well as taking up a job and buying the first new squash racket for Gopi, which I think was a changing moment in her life also. And a couple of things which I was wondering about is, how did the mother die? It's never mentioned how she died, because she obviously died young. And also the fact that Auntie Ranjan was such a conservative, nosy, affectionate woman. And how come Gopi went there when her father wanted her to compete in Durham and in Cleveland? I thought that he would keep Gopi under his wings and let go of one of the other girls. Why was she chosen rather than the other two siblings? And maybe that's why it had the most profound impact, because she really had to deal with the maximum change. She played the squash that her father wanted to. She relocated her home. So she was really mostly impacted by this, by the grief. Yeah, that's it.
Wonderful, Sangeeta. I think you've pressed upon several points which we hadn't come out with. I just wanted to read a short little comment by Edward Said, who is the guru of all of us who study cultural studies or literature or, across the disciplines. And he, right now, is, I think, very beneficial to think about, because he's a Palestinian, but he's a Christian from Palestine. And he talks about globalization, which punctuates all our lives with a book like this. And he says that about diasporic individuals and intellectuals, particularly makes us read Western Lane, written by a doubly diasporic young woman. And he says, exiles feel, therefore, an urgent need to reconstitute their broken lives. And that's exactly what we see her do, and her family do. Usually by choosing to see themselves as part of a triumphant ideology or a restored people. Both of those are true. The term translation from one to the other, from the weak to the strong performer, is not to describe a transaction between texts and languages, but in the etymological, how we learn, sense of being carried across from one culture to another. So squash is not an Indian game, but it incorporates the Western cultural milieu. The same time, I think the violence of that game has always struck me as not being lending itself to the Indian milieu context. I am not a sports person. My portly frame proves that beyond doubt, and that's since my childhood. But my association with squash was to find Harish, my husband, with a huge cut above his left eye, way back in Singapore. And I was concerned that this should not happen again, but it did. And it took a lot of manipulation from my part to stop him from playing squash regularly and moving on to some other game. So I wanted to bring to your attention that squash may be seen in this context of the book as trying to meld cultures, negotiate cultures, and show a kind of hybridity in diasporic people. Vivek, would you have a comment on that? Vivek, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Julie.
So,
my comment on that one is, the game of squash is a very hard game in the sense that you have to keep running all the time. You cannot stop to take a breather because you've lost the point then. Not necessarily violent. I mean, there are not many people who get hurt on the court, although I have to admit that I've hit a couple of people when I first started learning how to play squash. But that is not the point. If you're hitting somebody, then you already don't have any control of the ball whatsoever. And so it's as I think I've mentioned to you in an earlier conversation, it's like any really high level of a game is. It's like a game of chess. You have to plan out moves, 3 or 4 shots beforehand. You have to keep putting your opponent on the, making him lose his bearing and his footing in the court. So it's all of that. It's not really a violent game as such. But if you've got stamina and if you can outrun a good player by just running around the court and picking up things and getting them back into play again, and that tires out a much better player who doesn't have stamina. And he's going to get run out of energy sooner or later. So that's what I'd like to say as far as that. Mind you, India is also very much on the top of the Asian level for squash at the present moment. And that can't be forgotten. In days when we were playing squash, we had a number of actually top squash players also. But there was, at that point of time in India, sports were, it was felt it was infra dig if you practiced and if you had talent and you came out and played well, and if you didn't have talent, well, try harder. And that's about the way it was. It's changed now. If you want to get ahead in sport, you really have to train.
Is there anyone from the audience who would like to say a few words about?
I was going to say something about the squash.
Just a couple of points. One is my difficulty with diaspora. I think academics are imposing a word on an entire class of people who may not even see themselves as diasporic. It's okay to have it for the first generation of diasporic people who've gone and have freshly arrived. But then can you still keep calling them diasporic after the second and the third generation who no longer have any affinity with the original motherland, cannot speak the language, do not identify with the food, and have nothing in common with the Indians or the Chinese where they came from? They're completely American or they're completely British. So are we imposing a term without thought? Is it a thoughtless imposition to then use for a wide spectrum of people who are first generation, is diasporic in mannerisms, in the tug of the heart? 1.5, less so, half, straddling two worlds, one, speaking with masala dosa on one side and the hamburger in the other cheek. Second generation is probably hamburgers all the way. And third generation, it's vodka shots with pasta. So you lost them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the game of squash. Making a young girl is torture, because even for a young chap, like me in the teens, I was playing this in Lucknow and then in Bombay. I played well. I was on the squash ladder of the court of the clubs, but the ladder meant that as younger and better players with stronger legs came, you disappeared from the ladder, and then you waited till these guys left town, and then you came back on the ladder. So it's torture for a young girl, because it's torture for a young guy too. It's a game of sudden death. The rallies can be very short, and I think the traumas that she faces in her life may even resonate with the way the game goes. Because if you don't have the stamina, you can lose the game. In fact, you can lose the game without even playing a shot, because you're so tired that you can't chase a ball down.
A very well taken point, Harish. I fully agree with you when you say that to what extent, till where would you call the second generation diaspora? But I must point out what Rushdie says in his Imaginary Homelands, that we don't come to the point where we form total identities. We go back to our rootedness. And if you have lost them, as you said correctly, where it's either hamburger or the dosa, then that is true about globalization also, not just diaspora. It can happen anywhere. And also, I think, particularly in this novel, as Sangeeta had been talking about the unknown reason of the mother's death, Mona actually plays the mother. So this familial circuit is also a very diasporic thing, which is a miss in the context. And individually, if you think of squash, individually if you think that it is a too much training for Gopi, it's all true. But I still can't equate the British-born people with the diaspora instinct. The instinct does stay there. I don't think we arise above that. Anything else, Julie?
Absolutely right. I'm a scholar or a student of the diaspora. So I take some objection to what you're saying, but you're absolutely right. We are still trying to work out where you draw the line and say, okay, second generation, pretty much hybrid, third generation, what happens? But I'll tell you one little story very quickly, which ascertains that there is a divide all over the world. Now you see in Canada, in Toronto, right, in the Alpha City of Toronto, you have a huge Sri Lankan Tamil population who are the ones who went during the uprising. And we call it the reinvention of culture. Here in Tamil Nadu or in Sri Lanka, you are not going to the source of the Ganga or to Benares to bring Ganga water to do those rituals. But when a young girl reaches over puberty and comes to menstruate, in Toronto, they will send for Ganga Jal. That is the preservation of culture. So how do you talk about the diaspora, and how do you talk about making the diaspora, drawing a line there? It's difficult. Amit, did you have your hand up? Please go ahead. Go ahead.
On the connection between sports and hormones and so on, as was mentioned by someone. Now I am reminded when I was serving as, I worked in the state of Haryana, which is one of the leading sports states in the country. We had a police officer propose that in order to wean away the youth from drugs, we must have more of sports. And the kind of chief minister also kind of supported that, and therefore we had a massive grassroots sports movement in which we brought in young boys and girls and gave them lot of sports training, and it was understood that that would channelize them away from whatever someone mentioned, bad habits and so on. Well, I don't know whether that theory is true or not, but as James Scott says, this is how the state sees, seeing like the state. So the state government believed that it did have a beneficial impact, and it did lead to a lot of boys and girls doing very well in the sports arena. Even in the new Asiad, Haryana is leading in medals. So that is one connection between sports and the other point is that coming back to the novel itself, which I read only 1/3 or 1/4, someone mentioned that the mother how she died is not clear. It's also not clear what was the relationship between the father and the mother. Diaspora seems to have frozen, say, 50 years back, 100 years back. The patriarchal family is there, and diaspora seems to not have changed with the new winds wherever they are blowing, whether in the UK or in Kenya, and probably in India also we don't have such families, or many such families have transmuted or mutated, but here we are fixed in some kind of a. The other novel which while reading this book only a little of someone says that it deals with grief. Now what was the mother's own character? How much is that brought out in this? I mean, just because she's a mother doesn't really mean that mother is the fount of all love and so on. Why do we presume that a mother can have a contentious relationship with children? That is the truth. The novel which came to my mind, which dealt with grief far more, to me, is M and the Big Whom by Jerry Pinto. And that dealt with a concurrent grief where the mother is not.
Amit, I agree with almost everything that you say, but I have a small problem here, and that is often, in many cases, grief does not necessarily punctuate into articulation and words. So with that knowledge already, I can say that amongst many kids that one has worked with, or even for myself, a major loss quietens you. So there is necessarily no marker that you have to express yourself, or that the mother may not have been a nice mother for which you don't say anything. So Parthuda first and then Anasuya. Go ahead.
Julie, I haven't read the book, so I just have an observation. I mean, I find it interesting that she has chosen squash of all games because it reminds me of two great movies, one called Blow Up by Michelangelo Antonioni, where he uses a game of tennis to say something, to make a statement in the film. Similarly, if you look at Alfred Hitchcock's Stranger on a Train, he uses at the end of the movie a game of tennis to express something. But for a person to choose squash, I mean, this girl, the way Chetna explains, she's typically, as I understand, not a sports person from a young age. Then suddenly to take up squash, I find it slightly strange. I mean, she may have had her reasons, but I would expect her to take, normally for a writer, to take something different, But squash is a very, very demanding game because I can tell you a world champion, I'm sure Vivek will know, I think it was Jahangir Khan who collapsed on the court and died. Yes. So to play squash for 4 hours together is virtually impossible for a little girl.
It's brutal. It's really brutal.
I just have to add a little follow-up to what Parthodha was saying, is that we've lately seen at least two other novels that artistic novels that are dealing with sport. McEwan's, one of his books is set around the tennis club in London, and a whole set of love stories of a young lad, with a middle-aged lady with whom there's a sort of Mrs. Robinson sort of situation. So that's one going on. The other was a recent Booker winner by the Sri Lankan author, which dealt with cricket, and especially those who bowled the left arm Chinaman, which plays heavily into the googlies of life, yeah? The constant chucking of googlies. The tennis novel with McEwan uses tennis as a marker of class, where to join the club, there was a class thing, and his parents very much wanted him to join and didn't want him to mess up, didn't want him to ruin things, but he does, because he then embarks on an affair with an older lady whose husband was not giving her much attention.
Thank you. Sangeeta, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things I wanted to say after Vivek spoke, in fact, about squash. One is, you haven't read the book, but actually she was inducted into the sport by her father. And she started playing squash well before her mother passed away. So he just sort of enhanced that. But that apart, talking about why people take up squash, well, I myself lived in the UK in the early 80s. Indians and Pakistanis play a lot of squash because it's inexpensive, unlike tennis and rowing. And so it's, they came from a low middle class immigrant family. And probably that's the only sport they could afford, and it's a very done thing amongst Indians and Pakistanis. And actually, these two countries lead the squash game internationally also. So, and all sport can be violent if it's played aggressively. It is a fast, aggressive game, but it is very much played by Indians and Pakistanis and very popular in London, in the 80s particularly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone else from Camellia or Dhi, did you manage to look at the book yet? Not yet. Yeah, I was hoping to hear some precious pearls from your mouth. Next. Okay, so Anasuya, after you, we'll turn it over to our hybrid friends.
Hello, this mic is giving me some trouble. Yeah, so actually what I, on listening to everybody, what I began to realize was The father was not communicative. He was probably never communicative. And he didn't know how to handle or help the girls process their grief. So he kind of, transposed one grief and replaced it with a big trauma, which was very present and difficult to overcome and very compulsory kind in their lives, so that they were distracted from missing their mother too much. So it was and he continues to be a pretty absent father as the story progresses. And we have to accept that he became rather irresponsible, forcing an 11-year-old child, to accept the survival of the fittest thought and accept that there was no nourishment at home. She had a future as a squash player, and her more affluent uncle and aunt would be able to give her the much needed support that she would need to be a champion player. So she took a very practical decision, quite unlike what you would expect of an 11-year-old. So that was something I just thought while talking with all of you.
I think the nutrition factor is expectedly from somebody who knows the subject very well, which is Anasuya. It's true. At no point do you see a sense of softness in the father. Vivek, you might have an argument with me on that. I'm looking forward to that.
I have an argument with you immediately, actually, because on two things. One is a point which we had taken up earlier in discussion, but we haven't really dealt with it today, is that she didn't go to her uncle and aunt in Edinburgh to continue her squash. She told she couldn't play it anymore. She was given a play that competition on the condition that she would never play squash again. That was one. Two was the thing that was mentioned earlier in the story was that this couple, the uncle Pavan and his wife Ranjan, wanted a child, and they were willing to take a child off the elder brother to help him cope with reducing the load from 3 children to 2 children. But it was very much adopting this child and be brought up. He tells that Pavan tells the girl when she comes that your father will still be your father, but we will also be your parents, at the same time. So that we haven't addressed at all in this meeting. Actually, I completely forgot about it as well, and it crossed my mind as we were talking just now. So
So Vivek, here's the question to you then. I think we had a very short conversation, 4 or 5 of us, yesterday about this, but I'm not quite clear, and I'm happy that Chris is here. Chris, I hope you're listening up, because really we are turning to you on this one. So my idea of fostering also comes from lived experience in the 80s in England as a student, and then in my years in Toronto. So in the Western communities, fostering is a very how should I put it, Anasuya? A natural mode, right? Natural thing to do. If you can't bring up your kids, if there's not enough equity, not enough bread on the table, leave alone the bacon and the cheese, then somebody else will look after the kids. Fostering. In the Indian situation, I have never come across in urban centers this idea of fostering. Am I wrong?
I fully agree, Julie. And somehow I felt the timing of this fostering was quite incorrect, given that the 3 girls were so bonded and they were supporting each other through the grief, and it was quite inappropriate to take her away from that support system and taken so far away to an aunt who was not really very warm, and she was not really very loving. So it was only serving the purpose of Pavan and Aunt Ranjan. It was not serving the purpose of Gopi in any way. So I'm trying to find something positive for Gopi in that transfer that she made to a home so far away. And the only thing I could think of was better living conditions. That's it.
So before we let Vivek have the last word on this, Chris, would you have a comment on this? On the idea of fostering? I mean, how much of compassion underlines that and how much of necessity undergirds that? You're muted. Chris, can you hear us?
Yes.
So
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really intrigued by the fact that you don't have fostering as a system. There's much more a strong community and extended family ethos in India. I think that must be why. But I remember one time taking a journey on the train to go to an Extinction Rebellion demo in London. And I happened to be sitting next to a woman who lived in the southwest, but I didn't know her before that. And she was somebody who had fostered 20 children. Wow. And she just absolutely adored the work. And, she was such a warm and compassionate person, looking after they were teenagers. And they had they had difficulties with their own families. And they just needed rescuing, and somebody that had the strength to be able to befriend them and talk to them about their problems, why it was that they couldn't get on with their own families. And I mean, I don't have a view about why that should be an admired role in life in my country. But it certainly is. I mean, it's very widespread and very important role, particularly, I think, for teenagers and also for younger children who are sometimes fostered for a while before they're taken for adoption. But are you saying that adoption also is very unusual in India? Does it apply to that as well? That a sort of totally different culture, definitely different attitude towards supporting needy children. Is that the case?
I think that's a lot. That makes a lot of sense because it's not a system that we have. It's not. What I mean is, it's not a legal, common done thing. Yeah. So you have a point. Although adoption is a totally different ball game. Adoption is very much a done thing. But your point about maybe in India we don't have a system of fostering makes sense. Vivek, please go ahead.
Julie, can I put in a word?
Yes,
Julie,
yes, please.
Can I put in a
please,
word?
please.
Yes. Like Choitali had just put a hint, like scientifically it says that we humans, we have psychological plasticity as well as biological plasticity, yes? So I want to put in a kind word about the father. Since a child always has that plasticity to heal the grief, so he just tried his best to bring in squash. So I felt we need to put in a kind word for the father as well.
Thank you. Vivek.
Yeah, well, actually, I think two things I wanted to just make one. If you see the first part of he was already playing squash with his children even before the wife died. So it was not something that came up as it was a continuation of what was happening earlier. Just that he reacted to going up to Edinburgh for the last rites after the last rites were over, and to be told by Aunt Ranjan that your children are wild. You're not, that there's nothing, you're not doing any kind of thing. So, buck up. And at that point, we are willing to take a child off you in any case, and we'll help you with the process. That's one part of it. And the second part, I think, was the fact that in India, not the fostering so much, but families taking up members within their own family, they are being adopted. They are not being fostered there. They are actually being adopted by the parents within the same family, cousins. Indian families were large families at one point of time, and it was for either the couple adopting didn't have children of their own, or they felt that they could help out with somebody who was struggling in a difficult circumstance. So I think the discussions today have been quite interesting and wide-ranging on what is such a slim novel. But I have to say that I really hope that she wins the Booker, because I think it's a remarkable book that she's written. Really is.
Wide-ranging, as you say. So from the audience, I would encourage you to say a few things more if you have anything in mind. Dee, yes? Always a pleasure to hear your views. One of the brightest in this.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah.
No, please do that. Thank you so much for all your great views, which I do agree upon. And we came in a bit late, so we might have missed a lot of the discussion. But as far as I heard, the question of displacement was not mentioned yet, and the fact that the connection between the mother and the mother language is very important in this novel, and that the girls spoke to their mother only in Gujarati most of the time, and that they don't get to speak that language at home or anywhere else except in their classes, other than that was their only connection, only organic connection to that language, and that they lost that in a adoptive country in which they only have to speak in English. And this sport of squash, I think, becomes a rather rather deliberate adoptive strategy orchestrated by their father, and he encourages and inculcates this habit of this practicing squash in them as a strategy for overcoming their lingering long-term alienation and grief. And so this sport becomes a means of not just losing a person, but also means of coping with the loss of a language, and a language of love, and how you then reposition yourself in the world after that. So I found this to be one of the interesting aspects of the novel.
We can always depend on thee to say the unexpected. Language of love. I think Choitali and I just cracked up on that one. That was wonderful. Maulida, would you like a few words?
Well, the only thing I could think of was when you talk about alienation against the backdrop of sports and society, there are 2 or 3 stories that come to mind. One is, of course, a book by John Grisham called Calico Joe, where the whole thing is about baseball and how the boys integrate to baseball and thereby try to integrate with the larger matrix of society. It's a wonderful book. And what he does is, in his introduction, he spends about 15 pages talking about the intricacies of baseball. What is first base? What is second base? What is strike? And so on and so forth. That is one thing. The other aspect of alienation that I can think of is from the film Chariots of Fire, where you have Ben Cross acting as the athlete in a strange society. I mean, he lives in England, but he is oppressed. And when he wins the 100 meters, his tutor says very grudgingly, well he did it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to say before we wrap it up? Anisha?
Julie, could I have another word?
To follow up.
Could I have another word?
Yes, Chris. Go ahead.
Could I have another word?
Yes.
Yes, the subject of squash reminds me of a friend I've lost touch with, but it was years ago when I was teaching in school, teaching maths. Her name was Mary Down, and she was half Burmese. Her father was English and her mother was Burmese, and they lived in this country. And Mary was a very, very strong squash player. She was a tiny person, very, very little, but she was brilliant at squash. And she used to beat the men that had competed with her. I can remember my then husband saying that she hadn't even taken her sweatshirt off. You know, she was so cool and totally destroyed him. And she was very conflicted as a person, very much in grief about losing her home country. She looked after her mother, who was pure Burmese, who was the most brilliant cook, but didn't speak English very well. But it felt to me as if squash was Mary's way of asserting her strength and being in the world, this alien world that she'd found herself in. And she was brilliant at it. It worked for her.
So the only thing I just wanted to add was that it would be impossible to sell a squash movie in Hollywood because nobody knows what the hell it is. It's such an obscure game. But it's very easy to sell Hollywood baseball, football, tennis, cricket now because they don't know what the heck it is. But squash is an impossibility. Therefore, what Chetna has done, Maroo, is to bring the obscure into the Booker shortlist.
Thank you, Arish, for that really meaningful comment.
Can I make a small comment?
Okay, so the last one. Thank you.
There was a film called Wondrous Oblivion. It talks about an English neighborhood and a West Indian family which comes in. And the man, one of the first things he does is he erects a cricket net for practice. Now, his neighbor is a young 14, 15-year English boy, and this is reverse alienation. The boy doesn't really know cricket. He's desperate to learn, but the West Indian father who has settled won't have him in.
Good one. Very nice one. So thanks very much. Choitali, would you like to?
Yes. It's been, although we had problems with the pre-Pujo Kolkata traffic, still it's been a wonderful meet. And what happens with every book club is that whenever we stop, whenever we say goodbye to each other, it's not really the end. We keep thinking of the book, we keep thinking of the comments, and we sort of appreciate the book better. So thank you all for being here. Thanks, Julie, for this wonderful evening and your efforts.
Thank you, Choitali. Thank you, Anasuya, Sangeeta, and all of you who brought so much to the table. Chris, thank you very much. Those were really endearing statements we will all remember. And Vinod and Vivek.
Vivek has gone.
And Vivek's bedtime now, after 100 kilometers of driving. You see a few. Thanks.
Thanks to all the members. I know it's the traffic is bad during this time, this pre-puja time, but in spite of that, you have come to our library program. So I thank you all, and we will have more programs in November and December, and we hope that you will join us. We have to do this now, so I would request Shevonti to hand over bouquets to the participants. Unfortunately, nothing can be offered to the speakers who joined us online.
Chris, Chris gets a virtual bouquet of roses. Chris?
Well, Chris, you can't see, but we are offering you a bouquet virtually. Can't reach you. Can you hear us? I don't think she can.
Offer it to Vinod also.
And one to Vinod as well.
He's acknowledged it.
So Shebhuti, please hand over the bouquets to our speakers.
Chris can't hear us suddenly.
Suddenly, I think something must have gone wrong. And I'm sure she can see the bouquet. Thank you, Anushka, and to Judy, of course.
May I please pass this on to Sangeeta, who's done such a lovely job. Please, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Morana. Thank you for coming. Very kind.